Okay, U.S. history. Welcome back for Thursday. I'm finally recording back where I belong in room 253. I was gone for 2 days, moving my oldest to Nashville, Tennessee, but I did stay after school quite a bit last week and did some work even there, just making sure that you guys had recorded lectures even while I was gone. But a little bit easier for me to answer the emails a little faster when I'm actually here, and so we're kind of back to normal. What we're going to do today is we're going to review the document review guide, and we're going to talk about some issues with that. And then we're going to prep you for your Bill of Rights worksheet, a new one for today. And then we're going to just go through a few amendments. So 11 through 15. So let's get started just to make sure we get through everything in a reasonable amount of time. And I want to talk about the worksheets. So my big concern with the worksheet is that if you look here, there are 40 responses, and that was for 1st, 4th, and 7th. And then there are 18 for honors. So that is 58 responses when I have about 85 students. Now, that means if you're one of the 20 plus students who just didn't do it because you never looked at Friday's lecture even through Wednesday, you have a 0 out of 10, and I'm afraid you can't make that up. When I do an in-class worksheet based on that day's lecture, I often will have it due at midnight, at 11:59 p.m. Now, because I was traveling, and really because I have some mercy, I didn't close out that worksheet. So anybody who turned that in Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday still got full credit. Now, I never do that for the document of the week. But sometimes on a review guide, I will. So that's why I'm not going to have much mercy on the 20 plus people that didn't do it, because that means you're 4 days behind in watching your lectures and doing your work. I have every sort of right or logical excuse to close it out at midnight. So today's worksheet that you have assigned, it's due by midnight. I probably won't be up at midnight to close the access to it, but I'm not going to let it sit around for 4 or 5 days, because at some point I want to review the answers. And once I review the answers, I don't accept any more worksheets, because obviously people will just listen to the answers that I give. So we're going to go over it. Even if you didn't do it, there's still a benefit to this, and that is these questions on these review guides, they don't just go away. They're not just for the benefit of the review guide. It's supposed to be a lower stakes practice before you take the test. These questions are going to be on the test. We've got a lot of different versions of the test, and I pull questions from review guides to make those tests. So we're going to review them. The non-honors worksheet, the one I'm looking at right now, we'll fly through real quick. And then honors have all of these questions plus a few others, and they just didn't get credit for a few of the ones in the beginning here. So these are the sorts of questions that you're going to see. Which document was written mostly by Thomas Jefferson? Well, from our lectures last week, that would be the Declaration of Independence. He's the one who gets credit for that. Which document was the first to outlaw slavery? Well, that was mentioned for the first time in the Northwest Ordinance. So, the states that became Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin. Who am I missing? Indiana, maybe? Those states, those territories were not allowed to have slavery. Which document showed a weakness by not having an executive branch? Well, that was the Articles of Confederation. A horribly weak document that had no chief decision maker. Number 4, which document does Madison earn credit for being the largest contributor? Well, that is absolutely the Constitution. Not only did he play a pivotal role in writing the Constitution, he ended up writing all the amendments that we think of as the Bill of Rights. Which document encouraged public education? Absolutely the Northwest Ordinance. 1/36 of every township was set aside for public schools. Which document shows an obvious influence of an Enlightenment ideal of social contract and explains how it has been broken? Well, that is the Declaration of Independence, because Thomas Jefferson basically explains in this how the British government broke their social contract with us, and that's why we're entitled to declare our independence. Constitution itself is Federalist. Federalists are people who are for the Constitution. Anti-Federalists were, if not against it, because that's what anti means. They at least wanted some things fixed before they could support it. So, number 7. So you only have to choose. Is it Federalist or Anti-Federalist? The national government under the Constitution is too strong, and state governments are not given enough power. Who would have said that, a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist? That is absolutely an Anti-Federalist. They thought that the Constitution, as it was originally written, gave too much power to the federal government. That's why, for example, the 10th Amendment, which was written to make Anti-Federalists happy, says states have a power if it's not specifically given to the federal government. Number 8, where are our rights listed? We do not trust the new government to recognize rights not specified. That is probably the most important thing that the Anti-Federalists said. The Federalists were like, oh, it's assumed. And the Anti-Federalists said, no. We want this written out. That's why the Federalists then wrote, as they promised, the Bill of Rights. They said, okay, we'll list them. You pass this, we promise we'll list them, and they did. And that's why the Anti-Federalists are important. If they hadn't made that complaint, perhaps the Bill of Rights would not have been written. Okay, number 9, no government is perfect, but the Constitution lays out a plan that is logical and fulfills the ideals of our revolution and the ideals of the Enlightenment. Well, that's what the Federalists believed, that this was a good plan. But it wasn't perfect. They knew that. That's why they allowed for amendments, 27 of which have been made through 2020. So, Federalist, okay? The Federalists were in favor of it. The Anti-Federalists wanted the changes. Now, branch of government. It talks about a situation that is actually not uncommon in a lot of communities. And it says when a zoning officer shows up to issue a family a ticket for violating this parking ordinance with their camper, I think, or non-operational car, whatever it is, camper, which branch of government do they belong to? Well, the executive branch is the zoning officer because they're the ones who enforce the law. They're writing the ticket. If the family feels that they didn't really break the law because the camper technically was moved for 1 hour, who would get to judge or interpret if they were right? That's going to be the judicial branch. The judicial branch can say, you're not really following the spirit of the law by moving your camper for 1 hour, or they'll say, hey, you moved it for an hour, that's good enough. That's going to be on them. And which branch of government made this ordinance or law? The legislative branch makes these laws. Challenge question, describe one check or balance, a power that one branch of government has over another. Now, a lot of people here just wrote, oh, the legislative branch makes laws. That's not what they're asking. They're asking for a power you have over another branch so that no one branch gets too powerful. They all have these powers against each other to offset any one of them becoming too powerful. In this particular case, I think the easiest thing to say is the executive branch can veto a law passed by the legislative branch. But to get the full point, you had to say the branch of government, the action, and against what branch of government. But you could have also said the legislative branch can override a veto issued by the executive, or the judicial branch can judge a law unconstitutional issued by the legislative branch. And there are other examples as well. Now, the honors review worksheet, very similar, except they had a few sort of challenge questions on top of that. Place the 4 documents we use in chronological order. The first document would be the Declaration of Independence. The second document would be the Articles of Confederation. Then, actually under the Articles, they issued the Northwest Ordinance. It's about the only thing done well under the Articles. And then finally, the Constitution. So those are the 4 in order. This was the one that was really tough, though. Thinking of federalism, you had to name the level and the branch. So is it local, state, or federal? Is it executive, judicial, or legislative? So thinking of this, if you wanted to remove the air test from the state of Ohio, would that be local, state, or federal? That's state. Who would change that law? Legislative branch. So it is state and legislative. Okay? Thinking of federalism and the fact that each branch, which level and branch of government should you seek to change the speed limit on the Ohio Turnpike? Again, you're changing the law, so that's going to be the legislative branch. Well, who's going to do it for the Ohio Turnpike? Well, that's the state level. You know, your city commissioners won't have anything to do with the state speed limit, but they will decide it on any local street. Thinking of federalism and the fact that each branch, yes, which level and branch of government would you seek to change the speed limit on Interstate 71? Now, when I wrote this, I didn't know I'd be barreling down Interstate 71 for a couple hundred miles, but that is a road that goes through several states. That means it has to be at the federal level because anything that's multi-state, it can't just be one state. Then it's automatically the federal government, and it's the legislative branch because they're changing that law. All right, same idea. So you get busted for curfew, and you say, I don't think I'm breaking my curfew because I was in my car, and my car is an extension of my home. Now, courts have already ruled on this at a higher level, and you're going to lose, but your argument would first off be heard locally, because curfew is a local issue. It's not, the curfew can be an hour or 2 hours different from community to community. So that's a local level. And who's going to judge or interpret whether or not your car is quote unquote home? Well, that's going to be the judicial branch. So local and judicial. And the last one, thinking of federalism, yada, yada, yada. Who would you seek out if you think your civil rights are being violated and the government is not enforcing existing discrimination laws when you fly in an airplane? Okay, so now we're talking about, again, an airplane, which is usually going multi-states. So we're looking at the federal level, and we're talking about enforcement. We don't think you're enforcing discrimination laws. Enforcement's always going to be the executive, so it's federal and executive. Now, that is going to be on your test, and your test is going to be probably looking at a week and a half. I'll give some more specific warnings as we get closer, but you've got to know these basic things, and that's what these lectures are all about. So today's worksheet is going to be all about the Bill of Rights, so the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So today's worksheet is only going to have you answer questions about these 10, which I've explained in 2 lectures from last week. If you haven't seen those lectures yet, go back, watch them, take the notes, then do the worksheet. If you do the worksheet before watching it, it's going to make it a lot harder to get a good grade on that worksheet. That should make sense. If you blow off the worksheet and don't get it done, you are running the chance of the worksheet being cut off and you having a 0, because let's face it, we're coming back in all likelihood October 19th. And when we do, class is more like normal. Hey, when I give a worksheet in class, I usually say, hey, it's due by the end of class. I mean, now you're getting till midnight at least, and if you can't get it done by then, it's really kind of a weak excuse. Okay, so that's what you'll be doing when you're done here. For today, we are going to do amendments 11 through 15. Okay, 11 through 15. And those will not be the answer on any of today's worksheets. But you want to take these notes because there's another worksheet that's going to review all of the amendments, and you'll need to know all of these. The first couple are very straightforward and very simple to understand, so we're going to move through them a little bit faster. The 11th Amendment, suits against a state must occur in a state court. If I'm going to sue the state of Ohio, it starts in Ohio. I can't sue the state of Ohio from a Michigan court. I hope that makes sense. It's really straightforward. It's really boring, honestly. Now, that can end up all the way in the Supreme Court, but it has to originate in that state. So I want to sue the state of Ohio. That court case is going to originate in Ohio. Very straightforward. 12th Amendment, it's worded very weirdly, but essentially this will make more sense if I tell you how it used to be before the 12th Amendment. Before the 12th Amendment, whoever got the most votes for president became president, and whoever got the second most became the vice president. That's an insane system that they immediately figured out was a problem. So, for example, John Adams, who was for a while great friends with Thomas Jefferson, but for a while hated Thomas Jefferson, and then became friends later on, they ran against each other, and John Adams won. Thomas Jefferson came in second, and he had to be his vice president, and that did not work well. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016 and Trump had to be her vice president. You have two people with very opposite ideas. Or how it actually played out. Trump wins in 2016. Instead of Mike Pence being the vice president, it's Hillary Clinton. That if you know anything about politics, how crazy would that be? And again, going into 2020, if the 12th Amendment hadn't passed, Trump and Biden would be president and vice president. We just wouldn't know which order. Can you imagine Biden being the vice president to Trump? Can you imagine Trump being vice president to Biden? That's insane. So what we're saying is when you elect somebody for president, when you cast your vote for whoever you're voting for president, whoever their running mate is assumed to be who you're voting for vice president. They're going to run as a pair. So you vote for Donald Trump, you know you're getting Mike Pence as the vice president. You vote for Joe Biden, you know you're getting Kamala Harris as vice president. It's just that the two are linked instead of going first and second. Kind of straightforward, makes sense now. Can't imagine that they ever thought it was a good idea, but hey, at least they had room to fix it. Now, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, we're going to keep these together, and we're going to tell you that they're often called the Civil War Amendments because they happened right after the Civil War, or the Reconstruction Amendments because they all happened during a period we call Reconstruction, right after the Civil War. In a way, I always look at it as, especially when I teach this to AP, Advanced Placement U.S. History, I think there were a lot of naive people who thought, hey, if we pass the 13th Amendment, that should solve all these problems. And that's when southern states go, okay, we'll end slavery, but we're not going to consider freed slaves citizens. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. So then there has to be another amendment. And we'll go, okay, they're going to be citizens, but they're not going to be allowed to vote. Okay, and then they have to pass another amendment. It's like it's further spelling out. Now maybe some less naive people knew it would have to be a piece-by-piece battle, but we'll start off with the first one. Slavery's outlawed by the 13th Amendment. Now, in the news in June of this year in particular was whether or not people are teaching and celebrating Juneteenth. And I'll be totally honest with you and tell you that when I went to college, I learned about Juneteenth, but I learned about it more as a state holiday in Texas because that is absolutely where it originated. And really, double checking this and looking into it again, Juneteenth is more about a celebration of slaves being freed in Texas because they were made aware of the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. That's a whole other, all I need you to know for this class is slavery's outlawed, 13th Amendment. But if you're interested in Juneteenth, I want you to know that there was a crazy scenario where with the Emancipation Proclamation, something I'm not supposed to, not supposed to, but it's not in my time period to teach. When the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, Lincoln only freed slaves in rebelling states. He only freed slaves in rebelling states. So, for example, in Kentucky or Maryland, you had slaves, but because those states did not rebel, it remained legal to have slaves because the Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in rebelling states. Now, the 13th Amendment actually outlaws slavery. Now, that's passed by Congress in, I think, January of 1865, and it's ratified, meaning officially an amendment, in December of 1865, which begs the question then, why are we celebrating June 19th, Juneteenth, as 1865, in the middle of that year is sort of a holiday, a celebration of the end of slavery? Again, I was taught in college that it's more of a Texas holiday because that's where the Emancipation Proclamation was finally enforced. But from a legal perspective, slavery is not outlawed everywhere in the United States until the 13th Amendment passes, which is in December of 1865. So Juneteenth may very well be when most slaves in Texas were set free. Not in Maryland, for example. Not in Maryland, not until December of that year. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, just all you need to know is slavery is outlawed. And Juneteenth has become a more popular celebration of and that's fine. That's more of a symbolic end. I almost wish there was a holiday for the 13th Amendment, though, because it's more national and all-encompassing. But, hey, that's absolutely fine. 14th Amendment, rights of citizens defined. Okay, now this one has a little bit more substance to it. Well, listen, the 13th is very important, but it's very straightforward. Slavery's outlawed. There's not a lot of need for elaboration. Because southern states were very clearly going to try to get around this, the 14th Amendment is a more aggressive attempt to bring about equality by saying, okay, we're going to define who a citizen is. And basically, if you're born, if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen. So that means freed slaves. Anybody born in the United States would be a U.S. citizen. There was no end run for the southern states to get around this. And that all citizens are entitled to due process and equal protection of the laws. Now, a very famous court case from, I believe it would have been the early 90s, occurred in this one. where the 14th Amendment was put in action with this part here, equal protection of the laws. And what it was a couple LA neighborhoods which shared a regional police response. One neighborhood, which was more affluent, richer neighborhood, a wider neighborhood, when they called 911, they had a response time that was something like 6 or 7 minutes. Now, that's a pretty good response time, but I will tell you, if someone's like breaking into your home or something, your home is on fire, 6 or 7 minutes probably seems like an eternity, because a lot can happen in 6 or 7 minutes. But listen, that's the reality. It takes a certain amount of time for people to get going to where they're going. That same police force was also supposed to protect the citizens of a different neighborhood, which was a poorer neighborhood and predominantly African American. And the response times there were something more like 24 minutes. That is a textbook example of citizens not being given equal protection of the law. The very same police force was able to get there under 10 minutes to the quote-unquote white neighborhood, but to a minority neighborhood, they're taking over 20 minutes. 20 minutes is an eternity in an emergency. If you call 911 because a fire has started in your kitchen and they don't show up till 24 minutes later, you may not have a house anymore. You certainly have lost your kitchen, and God forbid, maybe lives are in danger. So that's not equal protection of the law. Now, I will say this. It doesn't mean that everybody has to have the exact same police response time. The reason that that was such a specific case that was relevant is because it was supposed to be the same police force. They were both paying the same taxes for the same protection. If Norwalk has a slower response time than Sandusky, that isn't necessarily a violation of the amendment, because Sandusky's police force protects Sandusky and Norwalk's protects Norwalk's. And I'm sure they work together, but you get the basic idea. But when you have one police force, a satellite police force, helping two neighborhoods, you can't have them responding 14 minutes later on one side of town than the other. So that's just an example, entitled to equal protection of the law. And whenever that doesn't happen, people sue. And that obviously gets judged or interpreted by the judicial branch, in that case by the Supreme Court. Okay, last one for today. 15th Amendment, the last of the Reconstruction Amendments. So these all pass between 1865 and 1868, all right after the Civil War, all during a time period called Reconstruction. Southern states said, fine, African Americans are citizens, but we're not going to let African Americans vote. Good grief. So they have to specify, okay, African American men may vote with the 15th Amendment. Now, that's significant because there were a lot of people who said, wow, you went out of your way to say men. So we're still apparently as a nation going to hold on to the sexism and say we're not going to let you vote women. We're going to let men vote. And then there was a presumption among a lot of African American women in particular and advocates for voting rights, suffrage they call it, that African American men, having been disenfranchised, that's a big word that means people that didn't have the right to vote and now enfranchised have the right to vote, would fight for women. And it turns out that African American men at that time were just as sexist as everybody else, and so women did not get the right to vote until 1920 with the 19th Amendment. That is much, much later, like basically 50 some odd years later. So it's a very halted and unsteady march towards progress, but there is some progress. All right, so the 13th, 14th, and 15th, those together are called the Reconstruction Amendments. That's all we had to cover today. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you do your worksheet. Your document of the week was already due. If you didn't do it because you didn't realize the week ended on Thursday because you didn't watch Monday's lecture, there's no reason to turn that one in late. I'm sorry, guys, but when I get a late document of the week, I don't do anything with it. I mark it as 0 because you can do it any time. Could have done it any other time during the week. So go and get those good Bill of Rights worksheet grades in, and I will talk to you on Monday. Remember, no school on Friday. That was an NOEA day, and the only thing that will be posted is Fun Day Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody.